podcast. I'm Scott. So I'm from Gratitude Strength Club. It's a local gym in Hillsboro, Oregon, where we really focus a lot on not just a singular discipline of fitness, but kind of a health and wellness thing overall, whether that's, doing CrossFit or Olympic lifting, talking about diet, nutrition plans, things like that. And today we've got EC Synkowski here as our guest. And I'll let you introduce yourself real quick, EC.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on. So, I started Optimize Me Nutrition, and my mission is to help make nutrition simple and easy, which I think is possible.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I work with individuals. I also work with gyms and businesses to help people do that.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so I have some just questions as I was like I said I was going through your consistency podcast,
Mhm.
which we'll definitely link to. One of them that kind of over and over again was coming up to me because we bring up some topics of like micronutrients, right? Because I think
Mhm.
macronutrients is talked about so often, and I in my head I really try and think of how I can keep things as simple as possible. And so there was this thought in my head, and I didn't know if it sounded ridiculous, but if I took, like, let's say like a multivitamin per day,
Mm.
where does that get us in the realm of like covering what we should be taking in for micronutrients for the day? Because I feel like it could be a lot, when I think about tracking all these different things. Like, is it so much that taking something like a daily supplement would help kind of take over that, or is there still the need to really focus and think about all the different ones?
Mm. Yeah, well, theoretically, the multivitamin will cover your micronutrient needs. That's certainly the goal of them. The problem is we don't actually see it helps do anything health wise. We find that multivitamins don't even help prevent cardiovascular disease or cancer, which are our two top killers. So it begs the question, if we're doing this thing for our health, taking the multivitamin, well, what the heck is it doing if it's not preventing
Yeah.
our common death and disease? So, that's one of the things that I really don't like about multivitamins. There's actually a lot of things I don't like about supplements, but that's a big one. Like, if this thing is
Yeah.
so wonderful, where's the evidence that it's doing anything? And we don't have it. I also like to remind people that supplements as a mainstream product weren't really a thing, I would say, till really the 70s. But the 50s is when they started being kind of like, okay, take your multivitamin type of idea.
Yeah.
How the heck did we get to 1950 as a species if we needed multivitamins?
Yeah.
So there was millennia of humans before us who were not weighing and measuring their food, who survived. You could argue maybe not thrived in all cases, but whatever, survived without necessarily even having this quantification of their micronutrient intake. And how did they do that? It's because they relied on whole foods.
Mm.
So whole foods, I think a lot of times we think about, okay, an orange has vitamin C and bananas have potassium. And you are correct, but they also have a bunch of the other micronutrients besides that one that we always hear about.
Yeah.
And so this is where, when you have some variety of whole foods in your diet, it doesn't have to be 30 different plant species every day, but some variety of whole foods in your diet, you get a really nice coverage across them, and you don't necessarily have to micromanage them.
Okay. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. I think just in general, the thought process that while I was listening to the podcast was really trying to keep things as simple and whole as possible. Right. I think that kind of topic and that theme just continues to go throughout.
Yeah.
Uh, so, yeah, because going off of that, one of the other kind of big questions I feel like comes up a lot recently, especially within a gym space, I've talked to a lot of different trainers about it, is how we handle clients who, let's say, are either now or in the next, let's say, 10 years start taking like Ozempic, right, or any
Mm,
of those drugs. How do we then change their diet habits so
mm,
that at least what they do intake is healthy? And again, maybe it's just the same idea, right? Stick with whole foods, but I don't know if there's going to be this other psychology or other habit building thing that we need to focus on
mm.
for that time period.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've actually had some clients who've been able to wean themselves off those drugs. Now, I will say the research suggests that most people will not be able to do that. But if you go into it with the thought of, maybe I do want to get myself off these drugs, you definitely are going to want to rely heavily on whole unprocessed foods because of their filling nature. But then also, even if you aren't going to get off the drugs, you're going to want to rely on whole, unprocessed foods because of the nutrients they contain. So, a lot of times, or I guess what I should say is, how you should think about these weight loss drugs is almost similar to somebody who has bariatric surgery, in the sense that these drugs help people severely reduce the quantity of food that they're eating. That's also what bariatric surgery does by shrinking the stomach, right? So, now we have to get in all of our nutrients, all of those micronutrients that you mentioned, all 28 of them, all of our fiber needs, all of our whatever other nutrient needs, calories and macros, into now a smaller volume, which even means we have to rely more on whole foods. We have less of a margin for these
Yeah.
processed foods simply because they tend to not have as nice of a coverage across them. So I would say that for people that are on those drugs, they certainly are going to want to have whole unprocessed foods to make sure that they get the selenium and get the potassium and get the magnesium, which often don't come when we have the chips, the crackers, the brownies, and all of that stuff. So, in my opinion, the approach doesn't really differ. I think oh, what would actually really differ? The difference might be that they just have to stay on the drug for a while, or that they're able to, if they wean themselves off of it, they're going to be actually able to ratchet up some of the processed foods they consume as they wean themselves off, because now they're going to have a more normal caloric intake than something so severely reduced. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think going off of that, right, one of the biggest things that I struggle with, even with clients, is how I can formulate the habit building changes, right? Because I think
Mm.
we talk about it, and I think so many people know, like it's not like I feel,
Hmm.
again, going through the podcast and reading literature, you hear the same things over and over and over again. So I think
Hmm.
to some basic degree, I think a lot of us know the right thing. It's just how
Hmm.
do we successfully change those behavioral patterns? So is there something you've seen has successfully helped your clients, or things that you consistently preach that are helpful in that sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you figure that out, you will have more money than Jeff Bezos. If you figure out how to control human behavior, I mean, that's right. It's the $1 million
Yeah.
question. And it certainly is. And I'm not just making light of it, but it is true. It's like the $1 million question for nutrition. It's how do we control habit change? And, a lot of that, and I'm guessing that we're going to talk about it at some point, so might as well introduce it now. But a lot of that is the rationale behind my 800-gram challenge, which is where I encourage people to start with their diet. And that is to add 800 grams by weight of fruits and vegetables of their choice to their diet.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, there is a big nutritional component to it. It adds some micronutrients, as we discussed. It adds some fiber. It cuts down on calories. All of these great nutritional things. But there's a huge psychology component to it, and that's what a lot of people actually really like about it. I'm not restricting foods. I'm giving them this huge list of fruits and vegetables that they can pick from. You want to do it on all strawberries? Go ahead. You hate kale? Don't eat kale. You want to
Yeah.
have potatoes and beans? Great, go for it. And so that's a lot of how I get buy-in and create habit change, is giving people a lot of choice and freedom. And I think
Yeah.
that's ultimately, it's really interesting. I think people, when they're trying to get started on nutrition, they say out loud, or they think, or they believe that they want something, like they want to be told exactly what to eat. Like, give me my meal plans, tell me yes or no. They
Yeah.
want these really like codified rule structures, when in reality, what they want is freedom.
Mhm.
They want a lot of choice. They want it to fit with busy days. They want it to work on vacation and all of that stuff. And so something like the 800-gram challenge, while it's not perfect and is truly my first step, it gives the
Yeah.
person a lot of autonomy and freedom, which they can adapt to their preferences and their diet. And that's how I can get buy-in.
Yeah. And I think the other part of what I liked about that a lot is it didn't make it so that like you're having to, for say, like track everything inside of an app, right? Just think about six fistfuls of different fruits and
Hmm.
veggies. Because one of the other things that I find difficult is someone will be really good and dedicated at tracking for like 3 days, and then they miss two meals, and then it's just like off the rails, right? And I
Hmm.
think trying to find ways so that they don't have to do that. I like tracking just because I find that I consistently way overeat if the second
Hmm.
I don't. Like I
Hmm.
just am like, oh yeah, this should be around that, and I put it in an app, and I'm like, I'm not even close. So for me, I like it. It's a structure for me that works, but I understand that it's not everybody, right? And
Hmm.
so I like that part of the 800-gram challenge. I guess while we're already in there, is there other parts of it that you want to dig deep in on why that program works?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I do like to let people know that the idea came actually from research. So they were looking at, hey, what's the volume of fruits and vegetables that people are eating? And then what happens to them in terms of death and disease? And this was a meta analysis, meaning they pulled together research from 95 different studies. So there was
Yeah,
hundreds of thousands of people around the world, not just US, around the
yeah,
world, that they were looking at their fruit and vegetable consumption. And they found that the 800-gram volume was significant, and it's where the risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, stroke, and all cause mortality, all causes of dying went down.
yeah,
And so that's where the idea came from. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. What if I try to eat 800 grams of fruits and vegetables each day with no other rules and restrictions, and see what happens? And I bring that up because I think there's a lot of trends in the diet space that are just sort of based off of the person's own whims. It's like,
mhm,
what if I try to drink celery juice every morning?
yeah,
And
yeah,
like, what if I try to only eat beef? And like, they go on this thing, they have results, and then they go and tell the world everybody should do it. Look, I mean, people have been recommending fruits and vegetables forever. What's new and
Yeah.
nuanced about the 800-gram challenge is that I put some rules around it. I also put a number around it, and I really codified it. But I really like it because we have evidence that thousands and thousands of people were
Yeah.
doing it. It's not
Yeah.
just like me being like, "Hey, I tried this wacky thing and everyone else should do it." It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
"Oh no, wow, this is what the healthy people were doing. Let's now emulate that." So, I like to bring that up because I think sometimes people will hear these new trending ideas and some of them are just sort of half-baked on the whim, and then this one is really evidence-based.
Yeah, and that's, even within the fitness industry especially, it's like a single, study will come out and then they don't look at like how that study was, actually done. And then yeah, the results are so skewed or biased in some way. So yeah, I think that is the other point where I have a client who reads one thing and I'm like, you can't use that as a Bible at this point. You really you need to have so much more other evidence and things that, and again, I don't, in my head, I'm like, a lot of this is not crazy stuff. It's really
Mm,
simple and it's stuff that we already know. And it's just
mhm.
people like want something new and they want something like insane sometimes. Like I love the analogy that some people like go to the trainer and if they feel like they're not absolutely wrecked, they didn't work out.
Right,
And I'm like,
right.
that's not the most
That's not
effective
it.
way, I feel like, yeah. One of the other quotes that you said, which I thought was hilarious, is that
Mm,
people will do anything to just not eat vegetables, right? And
totally.
it's so true. And I mean, I've had those moments myself too, right? Like where I have like I'll be like thinking about a day and it's not happened once, and I'm like, oh my gosh. The other question related to vegetables, though, is why is potatoes so demonized? Because I
Mm.
feel like that's the one that people in general are like, oh, it's like starch and carbs, and it's just like out of all the vegetables, like the least. And I'm like, I love potatoes, and it's an easy thing to add into stuff. So
Yeah.
I feel like that would be a hard one to just not to just totally dismiss. So do you have some rationale why people find that potatoes aren't within that same vein of like healthy, amazing vegetables?
Well, you are correct. They are healthy and amazing. I don't really have rationale for why they got demonized. I think
Yeah,
just when people go low carb, they're certainly higher on the carb spectrum than spinach. Now, it's funny relative to eating a bucket of ice cream or a bag of chips, they're quite low carb, but
yeah,
nevertheless, they are higher than asparagus and spinach and broccoli. So maybe a little bit of that. I also think a lot of places that potatoes show up in our modern food environment are not always awesome. Like if we eat a plate
yeah,
of French fries, that's entirely different than baked
yeah.
potatoes at home.
Sure.
um potato chips obviously, so there's ways that potatoes become not so healthy in our
Yeah,
diet,
yeah,
and so cutting back on potato food process items is probably a good idea. But
yeah,
yeah, potatoes are awesome. They're actually quite healthy. They have a caloric density of about 1 calorie per gram, which is going to be less than virtually all our processed foods. And there was this cool, it's an older study, but they were looking at satiety, and they were looking at satiety between different food groups. And they included vegetables and they included fruits, but they also included processed foods. They also included bread products and they included potatoes. And I have to always like, I should print out this graph because I reference it all the time. But the potato satiety was like head and shoulders above everything else, including fruit, including vegetables, but also including all of these grain based processed products like breads and crackers and all of that stuff. Like people are really full when they eat potatoes. So here we have this item that has a low caloric density, so we don't need a lot of calories, but yet we feel really full. And that's exactly what we want in a modern food environment where it's so easy to overeat calories, right? So
yeah.
potatoes are wonderful. They are allowed on the 800-gram challenge so long as they aren't commercially fried. And people really like that about the challenge. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So speaking of the processed food stuff, because
Mm.
this is something, uh, what is like the definition of processed food? Because I feel like as a basic thing, it's kind of the mentality that I have in my head is that it's basically just when you see a bunch of ingredients and a bunch of preservatives and stuff, and then you'll like go to the grocery store and be like, no preservatives, not
Mhm.
processed, and I feel like it can get confusing for people. So outside of just the straight idea of whole foods, how do we define processed foods?
Yeah. Yeah, that word's gotten a little bit dogmatic. I think people will start to see anything that's been changed from its perfectly natural state. They'll be like, it's processed and I should avoid it. The thing about that is, in many cases, that's correct, but there are some cases where processing is just fine and we don't need to worry about it. Canned black beans,
Yeah.
um, making a homemade smoothie, so long as you don't put a ton of like, I don't know, added sugar in it, but that
Yeah.
processes the banana or that processes the spinach, but it's fine. It's not a processing that's a problem. Even protein powder. Protein powder is a really great example of a processed food that is quite healthy. No one like is at home just shoveling scoops of protein powder in their mouth, right? Like it just is
Yeah.
not something that we overeat. So when I say the word processed, I generally am talking about things that have a very high caloric density, that are these very carbon fat heavy foods that we tend to overeat. The chips, the cookies, all of that stuff. I'm not talking about canned black beans. I'm not talking about protein powder. So as part of my kind of definition for processed foods, I like people to think about their behavior around the food. Right? Like
Okay.
if it's this thing that you just can't put down that has this very addictive like quality to it, I think that we all know with the
Yeah.
bag of Doritos or whatever it is, we're probably eating a processed food. Now, I
Yeah.
will tell you in the literature, there has been this uh like a rating system for foods, or a better nomenclature for foods. And the stuff that I just described, the stuff that has the addictive nature, they tend to be calling those ultra processed foods right now to distinguish things like canned black beans versus the Doritos. They're calling the Doritos now ultra processed. I still use the word processed because, again, I don't like people to get so wrapped around definitions. I like people to kind of understand what we're talking about. But I think looking at people's behavior around the food, and as soon as it has that addictive, I can't stop, we're probably looking at something that we want to minimize in the diet.
Is there an actual metric that that kind of shifts it into that ultra process, or is
Mhm.
it just I don't know, more of like a psychological nature of it of food
Yeah, the
itself?
way that this system does it, it's more going to be based off of the ingredients. And so it's going to have all those preservatives, things that you're not going to find in a residential kitchen, things, these additives that make the texture really either crunchy or melt in your mouth. Again, stuff that you could
Yeah.
make in your own kitchen. But that's what really defines ultra process. It's not necessarily the caloric density, because caloric density is not perfect either. There are very healthy foods that are unprocessed with a high caloric density: beef, olive oil, right? So we're not going to want to put those in the same category as Doritos. Like no one's at home shoveling olive oil into their mouth. I mean, okay, in a world of 8
Yeah.
billion people, there's probably a few, but you know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean.
for sure, for sure. So yeah, so going off of that, in my head, I'm thinking of like one of the things for me that seemed to have worked is like I love cheese. Cheese is just
Mhm.
like one of those things for me that I crave it all the time. So I found a fat-free mozzarella, like shredded cheese, right? And it kind of it got away from having so many calories,
Mhm.
and still having a lot of protein, right? So for me,
Right.
it was like a win-win in that scenario. But I know that there's other things like, the ice creams that are seemingly healthier and things like that. Is the idea there honestly more, okay, if we can just get ourselves into that caloric deficit while still maintaining the macros that we want to say that are good for the day,
Mhm.
then those things are fine,
Mhm.
right? Especially to get us to that place. Because as we lose weight, a lot of those healthy markers get better,
Mhm.
right? Versus like, is there a point at which you're like, oh, maybe that's really just at the end of the day, it might sound great, but it's really not a healthy
Mm.
choice to make. And maybe we should just shift away from it instead of substituting for something else.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. You are correct. No matter how we lose weight, we end up being better off, assuming that we're moving into a healthy weight range and not a
Yeah.
malnourished weight range. But yeah, like, and this is why crazy weird diets can actually end up being healthy for people, simply because they reduce calories and they lost weight. Um, I think some of these products that are like the protein cookies and the protein chips, yeah, fine enough if they're stepping stones to help people lose weight. But I think what's going to happen with a lot of these products is they don't have enough satiety for people. And so this is where things like fiber and then getting foods that will help us hit our micronutrient needs
Yeah.
is going to be what we really want to rely on in the long term. Because that's actually something I talk about and I work with my clients all the time. I'm not interested in weight loss. I'm interested in sustaining weight loss, which is a different ball game. Like we can
Yeah.
lose weight. We can lose weight this month if you want to, but are you actually going to keep those results? And when you look at people who really keep the results, it's an overhaul, and it's an overhaul to whole unprocessed foods. And it's going to be because those help fill them up, help them keep them satiated, and also, of course, meet their nutrient needs.
Yeah.
So, yes, anything can fit within a diet. And sure, I don't mind if people have protein chips or protein cookies. But once there's an over reliance on these high protein foods that are just processed,
Yeah.
most of the time people can't stick to it in the long term because they're missing out on the satiety and the filling nature.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. The other thing, so I actually, the front half of the week, I work overnights,
Mm.
and it's in for a semiconductor company. And so like I'm curious how that sleep schedule, because I do as soon as my week ends, I swap, right? So I stay up really late for one day and then I swap to a normal sleep schedule. Um it's not that I have a ton of people that I know, but like obviously all my coworkers are in the same vein
Mhm.
as me. Is there something to be said about having those sleep schedules constantly changing that changes? Because one of the things I notice is obviously like I'll get home at like 8 in the morning and I'll like want a dinner, right?
Mhm.
It's like really weird. So I feel like my satiety is all over the place. So
Mhm.
obviously I know that like not sleeping would affect you in a really negative way, but like just having those sleep patterns be constantly flipping, even if you're getting, roughly the 6 to 8 hours of sleep, still affect that. I wasn't sure about any literature in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done a ton of research with circadian rhythm, but I do know that, yeah, like obviously we were meant to sleep at night. And so it tends to be that when we don't have a normal sleep cadence and we don't have enough of a normal sleep cadence, that, yeah, it starts to affect appetite and satiety. And so this is one of the things I talk to people about all the time. Now, of course, if we have a job that prevents that, we have to do the best we can within the confines that we have. But I like to say that I think sometimes a regular sleep schedule is the best diet hack. Also say that about exercise, which we can go into too.
Yeah.
But the idea is, it's like, hey, if you're hungry, and this is what happens is people tend to be more hungry even when they've eaten enough calories.
Mhm.
It's hard. It's hard to stick on the
Yeah.
diet when you're hungry, especially in a processed food environment. One of the things I joke about, I actually just said it with my master class yesterday. It's like some of this stuff is not hard if we dropped you off on a deserted island in the South Pacific and all you had is turkey breast and strawberries, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, it's quite easy to stick to that diet. But no, we're in this environment where literally every time you turn around, you can have a brownie or a cupcake or a cookie or ice cream or soda. You
Yeah.
fill in the blank, right? So in that environment, it's very hard to stay on track. And so we want to minimize all these things that pull us off track. And lack of sleep and lack of regular sleep pattern is going to pull us off because we tend to have more hunger, more cravings. We're not as satisfied, even on when we've eaten enough calories.
Yeah. So the other kind of token that goes with that is energy drinks, right?
Mm,
Is there's a lot of caffeine. And
yes.
I will not even pretend that I am a better person about it. I am definitely having an energy drink or two. I'm sure some coworkers will make fun of me while listening to this because sometimes it's more. Um, so they're also, I feel like, again, I know that they're terrible, right? But I
Mm,
don't, I think, understand maybe from like a deep dive of how terrible or why they're so bad for you.
mm.
And if we do, I feel like if I understand it in a better light, maybe I'll switch to tea or something like that, or I'll try and tell myself that, and we'll go down
Let's get a coffee, a little stronger than
a
tea.
different yeah, yeah, yeah. Once it hits 3 a.m., it's like, oh man, it gets a little rough.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I think they're that bad.
Okay.
Especially the sugar-free variations. I'm not against sweeteners. You have to consume a ridiculous amount of these sweetener drinks to hit what would be the upper limit of them. And in fact, you'd be
Yeah,
well over caffeine limits before you hit the
yeah,
sweetener limit. So,
yeah,
from a sugar-free point, just drinking an energy drink, I'm not against them. When I start to be quote against them is really when either you'd be over the caffeine limit and you're having heart palpitations or anxiety or the jitters or whatever it is,
yeah,
or if it affects sleep.
yeah,
Now, that's exactly though why you love them at 3 a.m. because you have to stay up and you have to
yeah,
stay focused.
yeah.
But there was some study out, and I put it out to my email list probably several months ago, so I'm not going to get the numbers exactly correct. But it was like an average of basically people shouldn't consume caffeine on average after 1 p.m.
Yeah.
Now, this is again for a regular workday schedule or something
Yeah,
like that,
yeah,
but it was something like the lasting effects for a lot of people were upwards of 8 hours plus, 12 hours plus for caffeine drinking. And so I think there's a lot of people who have gotten habitual use of caffeine in the afternoon. So they're like, oh, it doesn't bother me when I sleep. But if they really were to take it out of that afternoon kind of pick me up, I think they would find that their sleep is better off.
mm,
So that's when I'm not really a big fan of the energy drinks because it's like, well, what about if we just get back on a good sleep cycle? Now, I know you are in a situation that's slightly different, but for most people, get on a good normal sleep cycle. Maybe we can get out the energy drinks and just be better off overall.
yeah,
And again, not because of the sweetener, but because we're interfering with sleep for a lot of people.
yeah. And the other part of it that I do also wonder, and it affects, I think, both the drinking and energy drink and food, is almost like if you hit a moment where you're bored and it's like that
Mm,
rest period at work, and then you're like, well, I guess I'll just go get something, And I think that habit is like
mhm,
so powerful, and that's one that I'm actively, trying to break for myself. But when I talk to a client, I feel like a lot of us kind of share that similar thing, where as soon as you have like a down moment, you're like, all right, well, I've been sitting here for 2 hours. Let me go grab a snack. And I loved when you had one of your conversations in the podcast talking about snacks, because I
mhm.
found that so fascinating, because I don't think I'd ever heard someone be like, if you take away the snacks and you were more mindful at the meals, I think it could solve me. I don't maybe I'm speaking words for you, so let me correct
No,
me
go
if I'm
for it.
wrong, but it could solve a lot of those issues, right? And I really thought about that for a while because I was like, man, like like snack that I grab, whether it's even like a protein bar or something, it's like, that's like 300 calories.
Hmm.
So if you just sat down, were mindful and thoughtful about the meals, and you had it dialed in and you didn't snack, I feel like it really could correct so many of those things. And I was just like, how I just in my head, I think I always thought of snacks as like, oh, it'll get you to that next place versus, oh, maybe it's actually interrupting you being mindful about your meals.
Yeah. Yeah, snacking is not necessary. I mean, I know I'm going to get voted off the island for that one, but it's just like it's completely the result of just like really expert marketing campaigns convincing us we need it. The body's remarkably resilient. You can go 6+ hours, 8+ hours without food. You can
Yeah.
be hungry. Now, whenever I say that, I always have to give the caveat. I'm not talking about shaky, feeling faint, only had a slice of a apple in the morning and now you're trying to make it till 9 p.m. Like, okay, within reason. You can feel hunger and it's okay. You can all that stuff. But I think you're
Yeah.
100% right. I think we use it we use food so much in our life and I know I'm guilty of it too. I work from home and so a lot of times it's like, am I really ready to tackle that email? Let me take a break. You know what I mean? And it would be
Yeah.
great to find breaks that aren't always break to go to the kitchen. Maybe it's a break to do 10 squats. Maybe it's a break to go check
Yeah.
the mailbox. Maybe it's a break to go, I don't know, walk the dog, whatever it is. But yeah, we use food a lot that has nothing to do with hunger because again, it's so abundant.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like it's like a social thing too, right? You sit
Mhm.
down with people, you eat together. It's crazy. So I guess I'll start dipping our toes here and more towards the fitness side.
Sure.
One of the things I was thinking about was, how we can try to more accurately predict maybe what our caloric output is for a day,
Mm.
right? And because like I wear like a Garmin watch
Mhm.
and I see what it tells me, but in my head, I'm like, I don't know how accurate it is. I don't know how much I want to put faith in what this is telling me. Is there some like wearable or heart rate monitor or something that might actually predict on a closer level what our daily output is? Or is that just something that honestly is so physiologically variable by person that we don't really have a good enough grasp on it?
Mm. We can do it quite accurately with a process called doubly labeled water, but it's very expensive to do. And that's what they use for research studies to figure out caloric expenditure or calories burned per day. But basically, people drink water that's been chemically tagged. And because
Mm,
we breathe out carbon dioxide, we can basically figure out how much of that water is left in the body versus not. And we can be like, okay, this is how many calories they burn because water is part of metabolism, blah, blah, blah. It's really cool.
yeah.
We don't have access to it. It's too expensive for us to
Yeah.
do, just person to person. So that's the best way to do it. These trackers that you wear, not so accurate. Not so
Yeah.
accurate. And one of the things that they're well, there's two reasons why they're really not accurate. They're going to be okay for estimating your caloric spend, just like sitting at a computer, whatever.
Yeah.
But they basically take that number of what they're estimating for you just to basically still be still and alive, and they multiply it by an activity factor. That's very subjective.
Yeah.
Like you, because that's how you'll describe yourself as like, I'm sort of active, I'm moderately active, I'm vigorously active.
Yeah.
That multiplier is just going to be so generic that it's like, eh.
Yeah.
The other reason why they're not accurate is your metabolism actually changes based on the food that you eat. So when you eat more calories, you burn more food. When you eat less calories, you burn less food. It's not
Yeah.
one for one. It's not a perfect relationship, but it changes. It's called metabolic adaptation. So
Yeah.
it also, the watch can never account for what you're eating.
Yeah.
It's be going off of your age, sex, height, weight, and probably how many steps you do or how many squats you do or something like that. So
Yeah.
it's not great. And so this is why with my clients, I don't use it at all. What we do is we look at your intake and we look at your body weight. And then we
Yeah.
know based on what's happening to your weight, what we have to do to the intake. So we skip this whole, it says, what's really interesting to me is like, even if, let's say the tracker was correct, let's say it says you burn 2,500 calories and you did in fact burn 2,500 calories, you would still have to measure your intake to make sure that you're hitting that 2,500 calories.
Yeah. For
So
sure.
now instead of looking at our intake relative to our watch, all we're going to do is look at our intake relative to our body weight. And it's a more accurate comparison of what to do with the system instead of bothering with the Garmin or whatever else
Yeah.
device it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree, it's kind of like one more thing that they're
Hmm.
kind of, I don't want to say excuse, like why results aren't happening. That was one of the other interesting points I thought you
Mm.
talked about was, you can do all these different things, but if your performance isn't actually changing, then are you getting better? Are things better?
Hmm.
Right. And so the tracking food app that I use, you put in everything and it basically tells you like, please don't do half days. Please actually fill everything in. and then
Mm.
it has you weigh yourself, and then basically what it will say is, okay, what were you successful this week at, what we want to maintain, build, or lose, and
Hmm.
if not, then it like kind of does some algorithm adjustment, right?
Hmm.
So it does the same thing where it doesn't care about what your daily activity was. So I like that in that vein. I will be honest that there's times where like it won't shift at all, and I'm like, God, it's like frustrating, So even when I want to go into like a build phase, right? 'Cause it feels so slow. And I think that's the
Yes.
other part too, is that this needle, whether you're trying to do progress, is so much slower than I think people expect. And so when they
Correct.
go through this, like part of the habit is also how to get people to understand patience for this
Mm.
process. Is there something that you guys have that conversation with your clients about?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a big one. And I tell them on day one, like, so let's say they come to me and they want to lose 10 pounds. My general off the cuff recommendation that I'm willing to say out loud to clients is that you could lose a half pound a week, which is
Mhm,
very low compared to what
mhm.
they see on social media. So if
Yeah,
they come to me and they
yeah,
want to lose 10 pounds, I'm going to say, okay, that's 20 weeks.
yeah,
So I said it. I mean, it's the first thing it's the first thing I say. It's the first thing I say,
yeah,
because I want them to have reframe their expectations. Most people will be like, 10 pounds, you can do that in a few weeks, if not a month. And I'm like, I'm here telling them it's going to be 5 months,
yeah,
Um, so I tell them that step one before we get started, such that when we're in week two and they're a little bit annoyed that the scale hasn't changed, I was like, well, wait a second. We are on a 5 month journey. We're
yeah,
not on a 2 week journey. What did you expect? You know what I mean?
yeah,
Now, I will say, it probably doesn't help the business model to do that compared to maybe some other
yeah,
trendy diet programs out there. But how I sell myself anyway is I tend to work with people who have done all the diets, who have been through all the trends, and they're sick
yeah,
of it because they don't have the results they want. So I would say another selling point of this is, well, how has all that other stuff gone before? That's why you're here, right? Like, you've already cumulatively spent more time than what I just estimated all this other BS out there, right? So, like,
yeah,
give me the chance to do something a little bit different. And yeah, it's going to take a little bit longer. So that's how I try to hook them, if you will, or sell them. But no, I tell them on day one, and it normally is a much, much longer time frame than they had in their mind. And they get to
yeah.
choose whether or not they want to stay and give it a shot or not.
I mean, I have to imagine the other part of building that time frame though is that you get to work on the exercise facet of things, right? And that builds in more
Mm,
time to work on that and build autonomy within their own workouts. Because that's the other thing. Someone who's new to working out really can struggle with it and not understand it and not like it. But it's like, okay, if I give you a longer time frame, we're going to go through that rough period, but then you're going to get through it, and then you'll have the results on top of it, instead of just losing
mm,
10 pounds, still never like liking exercise and not going back to it, and then you just gain the weight back, right?
mhm.
So is that also a part of that sorry, go ahead.
No, 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 yeah, sorry, I thought you were finishing there. Yeah, a lot of it is to cement the habits, because I think a lot of times what happens with nutrition, it's like, okay, cool, I'll get to my goal weight and then I'm done. When really, once you get to your goal weight, whatever you use to get to the goal weight, you have to keep doing those habits.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not go back to my old ways. Going back to your old ways is the direct path to your old results. So going slow is the way that we cement the forever habits. You want forever results, you got to keep those things going forever. And so that's why I'm also like okay with going slow, because a lot of times with nutrition, people will try to overhaul everything in overnight.
yeah,
No wonder you can't stick to it. You just try to
yeah,
change 16 different things. We do one thing at a time. We make sure we
yeah,
can do it on weekends and travel and yada, 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 and ups and down days. And we're really consistent with it. And then we kind of build on from there. So, yeah,
yeah,
it's kind of reframing the whole process. It's like, this is the forever plan. This is not the 6 week plan. If you want the 6 week plan, I'm not your person.
yeah.
There's other
And
people that can give you that.
for sure. Well, yeah, temporarily if it works at all. Yeah. The other part of it, I think I've really been interesting. So I watch the CrossFit games, and I like
Mhm.
following a lot of those athletes. One of the athletes in particular, Danny Spiegel, I feel like kind of really
Mm,
promotes the idea of eating. But one of the other things that was interesting that I thought, she's like, don't ask me for my diet because my diet will be different than your diet. Right.
mhm,
And I thought that was really a great approach, because I'm sure like some people were maybe like really bummed that she wasn't more descriptive in that moment. But
mhm.
when you train someone who it wants to be at that athletic performance, right? Where does their nutrition change from someone that's, let's say, just your everyday, 9 to 5 business type worker?
Yeah. Yeah, their caloric load is just so much higher, and they're going to have to rely on processed foods to get there, which I know is like blasphemy and another thing that's going to get me voted off the island. But I always use the example with Michael Phelps. I think he came under fire, when it came out that his diet was like 12,000 calories. Now, I think that was probably skewed a little bit high, but
Yeah,
whatever. This guy is six
yeah,
foot six. He's swimming 8 hours a day. he is not going to get to his caloric need on apples and broccoli.
Yeah.
The volume is impossible to get through to get to that level of calories. He needs pizza, he needs waffles, he needs butter, whatever, French toast. Like he needs all of that stuff. So the CrossFit Games athletes are going to be not quite as high as that. They're not as large. They're often not training 8 hours a day, but they are doing multiple sessions. And I think,
Yeah.
I remember watching Matt Fraser's video about his dietary intake. And yeah, it's more of a battle of eating enough.
Hmm.
It's more of a battle to make sure that they actually are eating enough to get through the training and to not lose a lot of their muscle mass because the training is so high. Then, plus the training sessions and not wanting to be so full for the training sessions, where do you fit in all of these calories? It becomes more of a
Yeah.
logistical challenge and that's another reason why they have to use processed foods because they can't be so bloated that they can't go out and eat a can of beans and
Yeah.
then go do your heavy back squat, right? Like it's still not going to go well.
Yeah.
So it becomes more of this issue of like fighting to get in the calories, and so why they're going to look like they have more processed foods. Now I do think they should still have whole foods in their diet, and I think 800 grams, for example, can still be fine. But
Yeah.
because their caloric intake is so much higher, it's going to look like a fraction. So you're going to see stuff on social media like donut after donut after donut, and it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
because that's the only way they're going to get to 4,000 calories today.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So your history with CrossFit in particular, I've looked at some of the research, but like, what exactly did it all entail? Because I feel like I don't want to like ask questions that have no bearing on what you actually did.
Yeah. Yeah, so I started, I guess, technically in 2006 on their seminar staff. So that was pretty early. And then I guess it was probably around 2011 that I came on board full time for the training department, which is now the EDU department,
Okay.
working on, writing the lectures for our different seminars for the level one, for the level two, test stuff, accreditation stuff, level three, level four, eventually when they started coming out, translation stuff. I'm probably forgetting stuff. But yeah, like really some of the behind the scenes to keep all of the seminars rolling from a content
Okay.
perspective. Yeah. And then I resigned in from both roles in 2017.
Okay. But it sounds like you still go to like a bunch of the events, and do you still like
Mm,
work with any of the athletes, or how are you still involved or ingrained in that
not
community?
really. I'm not involved. I think I went to the games 2 years ago, maybe. I went to the Rogue event this past
Yeah.
so I would say I'm tangentially involved. I mean, I started CrossFit so early and it's still how I primarily exercise, although of course my fitness level is not as good as it used to be. But so yeah, I mean I kind of keep up with it, but then no formal capacity or no formal, it's not like I'm going to all the events. And
Yeah.
I love the games in the sense of the expression of fitness, but I couldn't tell you who's winning and who's not winning anymore and all that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're going through the process, I guess the leap that I was trying to make there was as you begin exercising, how are your do you shift their dietary needs like as they exercise more and more, or are
Mhm.
you saying, hey, here's the dietary block that we're kind of doing right now? Make sure your exercise, or how detailed are you going when you're like giving them exercise plans, I guess.
Mm. Yeah, so I don't really do exercise plans anymore, and I probably haven't worked. Well, I don't want to say I haven't worked with a high level athlete, but yeah, I very much am working more with people who are very fitness minded,
Mhm.
CrossFitters, but they're
Yeah.
not professional athletes. They're fitness minded professionals who want to lose 10 pounds, want to get more pull ups, all of that stuff. Could
Yeah.
want to lose more weight, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I did used to coach some high level athletes, and I have had, let's say, some high level athletes come through my master class, including like one of the female champions on the master side and stuff like that. And really their issue is just going to be fueling enough. It kind of comes back to
Yeah.
what I just said. I had a guy in the master class, was a personal trainer and his caloric need was like 3500 calories. It's not that the class was inappropriate for him, but his battle wasn't like how do I fit in my ice cream today? It was like how do I reach 3500 calories today? You know what I mean? So the concepts still remain, but honestly for high level people, I don't want to say it's simple. It's really about are they eating enough?
Yeah.
Are they eating
Eh,
enough to fuel their training? And then as their volume increases, this is how you know if they're not eating enough. They're either A, losing weight, or B, performance declines in concert with losing weight.
Yeah. And then do you focus like, for example, I have like a client who really wanted to dial in like every single macro to the exact
Mhm,
gram right away. And I'm like,
mhm,
we're getting ahead of ourselves. Like, I honestly just want you to work out for the next month and have a consistency building there and hit a protein count. Right. And if you can do
great.
that for a month, then we can start kind of dialing in more. But one of the questions that comes up a lot is that carb to fat ratio, right? Is how
Mhm,
do I, do this? And I feel like in my head, I think I don't really care as long as you hit the calorie ceiling you're going to go for and the protein. Like honestly, whatever separates, if it's going to be something you can stick to, great. But I do wonder if there's some part of it where if they're starting to work out a lot more than maybe they used to, if we should try to focus them more one direction than the other.
Yeah, I think you're dead on. And that's sort of my three pillars method approach. Obviously, there's something else in there because there's three, not two things. But most people, once they have protein in a high enough range, carb and fat are going to fall in the 30s to 40%, and it's going to be just fine. Now, as the person's caloric intake climbs, those percentages will also increase, and protein will become a smaller fraction. And so,
Yeah.
typically, somebody who's a competitive athlete, I really wouldn't want to see carbs less than 40%. And the more that they're like a Matt Fraser, the more it's going to be maybe upwards of 50 to 60% to help fuel that high
Yeah.
intensity training. But, and I use this phrase a lot, like if they don't do anything wacky, they're going to get there.
Yeah.
Like they have to go into the, because if you're trying to get to 3,500, 4,000 calories a day, like you have to go into it with, I want to be low carb to mess that up.
Yeah.
Like it's just like, or you have to be like, I really, really love butter. Cause you have to, or like really just deviate towards these like really fatty stuff. I mean, because food
Yeah.
exists as a mixture of macronutrients. How are you gonna get more calories? Even if you go for ice cream and bread, like you're going to get into the range that's necessary. So I agree with you. I mean, with that individual, it'd be like, okay, obviously we need consistent training. I think
Yeah.
protein's a great step. I think probably for the next person, the next thing would even be looking at caloric intake after that and
Yeah.
make sure that's consistent, and not that then
Yeah.
one day they're 2,000 calories and the next day they're 5,000 and on, we
Yeah.
go. I think they're going to see way more benefit. And that's the other thing that I loved about the Matt Fraser video. He clearly wasn't weighing and measuring. Now he was very consistent in what he's eating, and so they had an idea of what he's getting. But it was all about fueling. And once you're fueling enough, and you don't do anything again wacky, don't try to only eat,
Yeah.
butter sticks. We're probably going to be in a fine enough macronutrient range.
Okay. One of the other ones, let's see here. Um, and I know that a big part of the pillar of the 800-gram challenge, right, is that whatever you want, right?
Mhm.
But I do, is there some, if someone was like, want to be very particular and they want to, let's say, maximize every single thing they could get out of it, is there certain choices that are better than others? Or at the end of the day, is it really like you're just going to, if you get the 800 grams, you're honestly getting everything you're going to need, no matter where you're at in that journey?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the only way to know is to look at the micronutrient analysis of what you're eating, because it does shift. Like iceberg lettuce isn't as good as blueberries. But I don't even like saying that, because if the choice is between iceberg lettuce and Doritos, iceberg lettuce is really good,
Yeah.
right? And it still has value. Um, and the same thing, like onions aren't necessarily as good as carrots, let's say. But again, from a sustainability and variety perspective, sometimes onions are a great choice, especially with
Yeah.
roasted peppers. They're delicious, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is why I don't even like giving stuff. And I think too, once we take a look at this beyond like a 2-day stretch, it kind of works itself out. Like some people are like, oh, I'm only going to do watermelon for the 800-gram challenge. Okay, that's cute. After day three, you're going to be sick of it
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're not going to do it. Or like, I'm only going to do avocado. It's like, well, that's really expensive. Have fun. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
report back after a week. And by the time you get to some sort of what this would look like from a sustainability perspective, we typically are going to have at least three, four things in there. We're probably going to have a nice average across this. But the only way to really know, am I getting everything I want out of my 800-gram challenge, would then be to go into the micronutrient data, look it up. USDA has it all for free. Figure it out for your carrots, figure it out for your apples, figure out your perfect thing. And now we're at, again, a crossroad that comes up all the time in nutrition of accuracy versus sustainability.
Yeah.
And once you start looking, and I do this with my master classes, we look at some of these detailed reports and it's like, guys, what's the realism of this? It's interesting, but are you really checking in on your selenium every night? Like nobody's doing it. Maybe
Yeah.
Brian Johnson, the guy who's, doing
That's
all the
the
experiments on himself.
billionaire.
Good, good for him, right? But like nobody wants to do this stuff. So
Yeah.
I think from a practical perspective, it's like, don't do anything wacky. Don't try to do the 800-gram challenge on watermelon. Have some fruit, have some vegetables, mix in some potatoes, have some beans. Doesn't have to be 30 things every day, but like buy stuff in season, buy stuff on sale, buy stuff you like, try something new. I think you're going to be pretty well covered across all of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other topics you brought up was planning for chaos, right? And
Mm.
like that you're not going to always have a great day, that things are just,
Yeah.
they're going to hit the fan, right? And
Mhm.
that there's some days where kids, family, job, whatever it is, sucks. And I thought about it and I was trying to think in my head what I would do to plan for kind of those chaos moments, right? Because if I always plan for the worst to happen, then I'll be prepared for it. But I I don't know if I had like the idea in your head of what are some ideas or what are some
Mm,
suggestions you make for people to plan for the chaos.
mm. Yeah, obviously it's going to have to be within what they like, foods that they like. But for example, I can get to 800 grams on a bag of mixed frozen fruit that I have in my freezer, multiple of them. There's 450 grams in one of them, and it's mixed. It's pineapple, mango, strawberries, something like that.
Yeah.
And then I have bag salads, and I often will put beans in it.
Mm, okay.
Okay, I'm already at 800 grams. All of
Yeah.
that stuff, preparation wise, I mean, it's like zero time. I have pre-cooked chicken in my freezer that I heat up in my air fryer. There's a type of pasta I like. It's like a soybean pasta that will take 5 minutes to cook up. Like, you want to have some of this stuff. Broccoli in the air fryer with Parmesan cheese is amazing. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you want to have this stuff that's like 5 minutes tops. Yogurt with berries,
Yeah.
eggs and whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like you want to have this stuff that it's just like on autopilot, that it's no more time than stopping at a drive-through and
Yeah.
it's just there. And it's good to I stock up. I mean, I'm not like a prepper, but yeah, I have a few extra bags of frozen fruit like
Yeah.
I just mentioned. I have a few boxes of the spaghetti and it's just there. It's always there.
Yeah, that's why I kind of in my head I think about either the meal plans, services, and stuff like that. And at the time when I look at it, I'm like, oh man, maybe that is a little expensive. I don't know if I want to go down that route. And then I look at the end of like my month and I look at a grocery bill and I'm like, that was way past probably what that meal service was. And honestly, I probably still ordered out because something wasn't ready to go. And so I think for me, at least, I know if I have like a mentally draining day from work, I just don't want to cook. I just don't
Hmm.
want to take the time to put something together. And if I don't have something there, then
Hmm.
everything gets derailed, right? So
Hmm.
I think a lot of people maybe like have like negative attitudes towards like frozen meals, and I'm like, I
Mm.
feel like you can find one if you're gonna eat it. It's
Hmm.
still better than anything you're gonna order, probably.
Yeah.
um,
Well, and there's also things like Chipotle. You can do really good at Chipotle. You can do great at Panera. I mean, don't order the bread bowl, but order the salad and get the, apple side.
yeah,
There's some great local salad place near me that you can do really well. I'm sure everybody has some. And so that's the other thing too that I would recommend is figure out a couple to go meals
yeah,
that are good and so you can rely on them. But then I also think too people need to kind of rethink what they consider a meal. I mean, last night I had eggs on toast, like an orange and an apple. Now, I appreciate that doesn't work for like a family of four or something for dinner, but
yeah,
I think sometimes there's this idea that every meal you sit down needs to be the 15 ingredient chili. And sometimes it's just like, no, these are three foods I like the taste of. They might not necessarily weave together in some perfect theme, but I can eat them sequentially and I'll still enjoy them.
yeah, 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 yeah,
And so, like, removing this expectation that you always have these planned meals instead of just like, I like to call it assembly or just even food combining. It's just sort of like, I like bananas, I like oranges, I like eggs. This is a meal.
yeah,
This is
yeah.
a meal.
No, for sure. All right, I got one last question,
Sure.
and I don't know honestly if you have any pre thoughts on it, but basically, I think about a lot of these questions, and I hear the stuff you've been asked. Is there a question that you feel like you don't get asked that you think about, or something that you're like, this is the one thing I wish people would ask because it just never comes up, and it's the one thing I feel like people should be thinking about?
I don't know that I do. I don't know that I do. I feel like we've covered a lot of the big topics and big questions and big kind of misconceptions.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, I think we kind of brought it up even with the multivitamin. I think people forget like how robust the human species is, how wide of a strike zone we have. Again, like, how did we get to 2024? Heck, how did we get to 1920 as a species if we needed all of this hyper specific, super personalized, optimized? Now, I get it. You want to be the next Olympian. We're going to have to put a little bit more time into things. But there's a massive strike zone for people, especially once they're in the whole food range. Like, even the protein number I put out, the zero point 0.7 grams per pound, I think it's a really great number. I think it's a really great number, especially for my more fitness minded, muscle mass gaining type of folks, all of that stuff. Does everybody need to hit that? No. Do you think people pre 1950, we're all just nailing their zero point 0.7 grams per pound level of protein. I mean, it's just so preposterous when you think about the level of specificity that some of these programs out there are saying. It's just like the body's remarkably resilient. It's remarkably resilient when you give it some basic whole food, when you sleep, when you exercise, when you don't smoke, when you don't drink too much. It's amazing. It's amazing. And I think we get so fixated in the weeds of all of this hyper specificity. And we miss the consistency of the basics, which I think I've said a few times, but it's again just giving people the confidence in this really wide strike zone so long as it's not a strike zone of Doritos.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the other facet to that is the idea that the people that we follow on like social media is like professional athletes. It's like we see their things and then we're like,
Mhm.
oh, we need to do that. And I'm like, unless you are a professional athlete, you don't need the same standard set that they have. And
Well, this is what's really interesting, and I love that you brought that up. I would be willing to bet that a lot of the professional athletes don't even need some of the specificity, but what the specificity brings to them is the mental belief that what they're doing is best, and that's the benefit of it.
yeah,
Because look at it, like look at it, all of the different athletes that are coming to the Olympics. Some of them are plant-based, some of them are animal-based, some of them are eating more protein, some are eating less, some are eating low carb, some are eating high carb, but yet they're competing on the same stage. So how does that work? It's
yeah,
because they're training their faces off. They're training like
yeah,
madmen. That's what's driving it. And they have the genetic gift to do so.
yeah,
And so, even among the high level, I think there's a really wide strike zone. But the belief in what they're doing from a nutrition perspective actually is the benefit, not necessarily that the specifics are so important.
yeah, yeah. I think DK Metcalf specifically says that he eats like 2 bags of candy a day. It's like and he's an NFL wide receiver, so
There you
it's like,
go.
yeah, awesome. Well, I super appreciate you giving me your time. This is amazing. I'm glad that we get some time together and hash some of these things out. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Awesome. Thanks, EC.